If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey everybody, we are back talking about the GENIE in Your Genes, Epigenetic Medicine, and the New Biology of Intention. We dug in a little bit in the previous podcast about Dawson Church, the author, about Eleanor's reservations regarding his background, and we talked a little bit about how this book highlights the things in our head maybe aren't just in our head, that they are affecting our body right down to the genes. Things like what we believe in, things like diet, how we were nurtured or not nurtured as a kid. And we're going to just jump back into this kind of conversation and carry on because we could talk a lot about this.
I know I insisted that we talk some more because I wanted to get into a little bit of the underpinnings of these ideas and the evolution of the idea that Dawson Church presents in his book.
Yes, and the first half of the book was the most interesting to me, and like I said, full of stories about these things in our environment or in our head that influence how we heal, what risk we have. So I wanted to talk about that. We talked a little bit about Dr. Ireson and prayer and nurturing, but we didn't get to meditation yet. He does talk a little bit about meditation, and one of our first ever podcasts was all about
meditation. Jay Shetty.
Yes. A
Think
great
Like
book
a Monk
by him, and he is a strong promoter of meditation, and his book has a lot of research about how, but one of the pilot studies they talked about in this book is that the University of California found that school teachers who were briefly trained in Buddhist techniques and who would meditate less than 30 minutes per day improve their moods as much as if they had taken antidepressants.
Oh, is that amazing?
It's so cool. And he says love and compassion are health skills in which we can train ourselves, and they have no negative side effects. So you mentioned earlier, even though there's some questionable things in this book in terms of the science background and the strong evidence that we may or may not have, it doesn't hurt to try some of these things.
Yeah, but since you brought that example up about better than, what'd you say, antidepressives? Okay. So in chapter 6, Church talks about iatrogenic illness, which is illness caused by medical practice. And it used to be the number one cause of death, but he says it's the third largest cause of death in the United States, just behind cancer and heart disease. So I don't know when he got his stats, but I have seen it as high as the number one, which means you need to have a little caution and you need to be a questioning patient when you're in the system to make sure that people are paying attention. But anyway, the idea of prescribing these things, he says, according to the meticulous analysis of data from a spectrum of U.S. government agencies, when all other factors are included, the number rises to 783,966, making doctors, hospitals, and drugs the leading cause of death in America. Each year, this costs society an estimated $282 billion. About twice the number of Americans die due to infections acquired in hospitals each year as the number who die in traffic accidents. Additionally, more than twice as many Americans die each year from the negative effects of prescription drugs. So if you're that teacher and don't do the Buddhist thing and you decide to take the drug, you're putting yourself at risk, perhaps. And when the effectiveness of the Buddhist practice is better than the risk of the pharmaceutical.
It makes sense to try the
Doesn't
meditation
it?
first. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think first, do no harm.
And it's kind of jumping ahead, but real quick towards the back of this book, he does reference kind of this, okay, here's where you would maybe go to your regular medical doctor, and here's where maybe you might think of natural medicine, and based on your problem, where you might want to go first. So,
yeah, but even before that, the over-the-counter thing, when I'm in pain, and we might have somebody come in and talk about being in pain at some point, because there's so many people that suffer from pain, but isn't acetaminophen and Tylenol, and isn't that a pain reliever?
Yeah.
Okay, it's the leading cause of death in the United States due to acute liver failure.
What?
It's according to this, he's got it cited as a reference number 31.
What happens when all you can take is Tylenol?
Well, maybe you don't need to take something, you need to do something, which is what these other modalities are suggesting, and they are beginning to show evidence that they are actually more effective than the drug you take. But the convenience factor and the immediate, I have to have it now issue, I think, causes us to seek quick cures. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's a tough question because I take acetaminophen every now and then.
Well, I want to talk about two other things, visualization and the placebo effect. I think they kind of play into each other, but he talks about this. And I really liked the mention of Carol Dweck, PhD, who's an American psychologist. And this is really important in my line of work as a dietitian because she does research on what we call the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. So your view of yourself can determine everything. If you believe that your qualities are unchangeable, which is the fixed mindset, you will want to prove yourself correct over and over again rather than learning from your mistakes. And the growth mindset is based on the belief that your basic qualities are things you can cultivate through your efforts. When with a growth mindset, failure can be a painful experience, but it doesn't define you. It's a problem to be faced, dealt with, and learned from. And so he kind of ties this in as the view of yourself, whether you see yourself as a failure, as someone who's always going to be sick or determined to have heart problems because my family has them, whatever that might be. Or, for me, I've gone on this diet and I'm a failure and now I'm always going to be this way. And there's a lot of good, solid evidence behind this growth mindset and fixed mindset. And now it's the thing that we're really tying into how we raise our children. Mm-hmm. Because if we can teach them that growth mindset, they're going to be so much more successful.
They might not have that head trash, like I made a mistake, but I learned from my mistake rather than I made a mistake and I'll never be any good.
Right, and now I'm an idiot, and I'm always going to be an idiot.
How stupid am I?
So that was cool that was in here, and it kind of leads, in my mind, into placebo effect, right? Because these people visioned that they could grow, and they grew, and the placebo effect is kind of, if you expect it to happen, it will happen. Well, and he has
but a placebo, we talked about this with Dr. Cheney in his books about the supplement myths. What is a placebo? It's a treatment that really isn't a treatment, but it might look like a treatment.
Right, yeah. So a placebo, I think it started before it was used in research, but the placebo is a treatment that is meant to look real, and you don't know whether it's real or not.
Exactly.
But you're expecting it. And the placebo effect is
measurable, and it is measurable.
It's measurable, and you perceive that the treatment is real. So your expectations of recovery might potentially, and what people think is that it might actually trigger the physiological factors that then help you to get better, even though it was a fake treatment.
And
is that right?
I believe so. And there are no side effects.
Yeah.
That's the cool thing about the placebo. So if you have the thought, there's no negative side effect, unless you have a negative thought.
So for our research studies, so if something is an effective pill, it has to be better than the placebo effect.
Right. So you give them a sugar pill and then you give them the pharmaceutical that you're testing.
But now it's not as ethical to give everybody just a sugar pill because you want to treat the problem if you have something to treat the problem with. So usually
that's a clinical trial.
Sometimes they use like an older treatment to compare to a newer treatment. Is that right? That's what I was. But anyway, 2 stories or experiments in the book demonstrate how powerful our minds can be and kind of around this placebo effect idea. One is the Harvard hotel maid study. So they took maids and split them in half. There's 88. So 44 of the maids learned that their daily jobs was serious exercise, and they were educated on how their daily work contributed to physical fitness. And then the other 44 maids were told nothing. And after 1 month, the researcher found that the maids who had been told they exceeded the Surgeon General's guidelines for fitness had lost weight, lowered their blood pressure, and developed a healthier body composition despite no changes in their diet or daily routine.
Isn't that wonderful?
So the control group, however, saw none of these benefits. So this kind of like, okay, when you expect to see the results, chances are you will. That's wild to me. They did nothing different. They just now expected their work to be beneficial to their health. How's that possible?
Well, I think he's suggesting that
willpower.
It's working at the epigenetic level.
Ooh.
Oh.
Yeah. So the other wild story in here is the fake booze gets students drunk. Do you remember reading that?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Have you heard this?
I've heard other things like this, but go ahead.
So 148 young British college students were
Here,
served
Tim, have a drink.
were served at a bar. So everything was real, from the bottles, the glasses, the napkins, the sights, and the smells. So they completely set the scene. But one thing was fake.
The booze.
The booze was actually just seltzer water. But they would mix the drinks and they would, open a beer, and all of that was real. So the students who were served the fake booze, and then they had like people being served real booze. So that was the control group, the real booze people. So the students who were served the fake booze still acted tipsy and similar to the control group. And their bodies, so the conclusion here was that their bodies generated the neural signals and neurochemicals resulting in intoxicated behavior simply because the students held the belief they were drinking real alcohol.
That's very disturbing.
Another
very disturbing.
mind-blowing experiment. So I don't know, that was just
thought control.
Kind of cool to demonstrate that our mind is more powerful than we give it credit for sometimes.
Yeah, and there's some people that know that and take advantage of it.
Yeah.
It's called marketing.
Marketing. But we can take advantage.
Tim, you're on the beam there.
But we can realize that we have power over our thoughts, and we can try these different modalities like meditation, positive visualization, the growth mindset, EFT, which we'll talk a little bit about more. So that was the cool part. Now, the middle of the book here gets into the weeds for me, and I thought, I bet Eleanor is really either liking this or has a lot to say about this.
Well, I'm reading this at a couple of levels because I am not a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I am not a practitioner. I am not a physicist, and I'm not an electrician either. So anyway, let me just start the conversation with the body piezoelectric. And the quote, I loved the quotes at the beginning of each of these chapters. They were very wonderfully provocative. So this one is from Albert Szent-Györgyi, the Nobel laureate in 1968. I just butchered his name. Maybe you can figure that one out. Albert, Szent. Tim, you looking him up?
Okay.
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
I have it, so let's see.
Okay. Gyorgyi. And he's 1968 Nobel laureate. But anyway, he says, I'm deeply sure that we will never be able to understand the essence of life. I can agree with that, although we're trying. If we restrict ourselves to the molecular level, a surprising subtlety of biological reactions is stipulated by the mobility of electrons, which are an atomic level, right? That's not molecular, that's below, right?
You're the professor.
Okay, well, you got molecules, and molecules are made up of atoms, and atoms are made up of electrons and protons and neutrons.
Okay.
So we're subatomic here, and bosons and mesons and all these things that I don't know about yet, and can be explained only from the position of quantum mechanics. So he devotes a little bit of a conversation in this book about quantum mechanics, and the author is not a physicist or a biologist or a heavy science foundation.
Albert Suzanne Georgi.
Albert Suzanne
Georgi.
Albert Suzanne Georgi.
That guy.
Thank you. Now we know how to say it. And thank you for helping me. I love it when you do. But anyway, so the author gets into some of these other modalities aside of from chemical therapy or surgical therapy. Maybe there are some alternative therapies or integrative therapies or complementary therapies, as we're calling them these days. And this goes into a really interesting conversation about electricity and magnetism as a foundation of medicine. And we have not had a lot of instruments over time that will allow us to measure any of that. And when we look at acupuncture and all these meridians of energy and some of the older Eastern medical practices that have worked for centuries, Western medicine has been very, very slow to incorporate them because they can't say how and why and could you get the same results from the patient. You know, I mean, it's just a different manner of treating people. So we now have MRIs, EEGs, EKGs, electroencephalograms. We can see some of these electrical fields and movement that's going on. And we know that the cell membrane has charges on both sides of it. And when a neurotransmitter changes a channel and disrupts the balance of those charged particles, we can get the conduction of a nerve impulse, which is really an electrochemical gradient, and it moves. So, I do believe we have energy fields. I do believe they are doing something, coordinating our life force. But he talks about this piezoelectricity. One of the most fascinating forms of electricity is one that is essential to the understanding of the mechanisms of healing. It's generated by mechanical means. When pressure is applied to certain structures, they polarize into positive and negative electrical poles and generate electricity. And so we have a cardiac pacemaker, in our heart, and that's an electrical system too. But when he talks about certain structures, you can't transfer it to all structures. In our skin, we have pressure receptors called Pacinian corpuscles that when you touch, it creates a nerve signal. So there's an electrical charge that goes from the stimulus into the central nervous system, and then that thing is conveyed out. So we have an input and an output, action and response. In your muscles, you have spindle fibers and Golgi organs that also are working on stretch and pulls, which are changing those same sorts of things. So I do think there is a scientific underpinning of this, but he goes on into looking at light and the magnetism, and it kind of gets pretty in depth and complicated for most of me to read. But he's saying that we can have epigenetic deviations that are responsible for tumors and DNA mutations. So if we're messing with those proteins that are covering the chromosomes, which then can affect which chromosome section or which gene is expressed or not expressed, you can almost make the jump to say, yes, I think this is possible. What I argue with is I don't know that we really have the underpinning evidence of it yet. And I like where he's going. I want to believe it. And so if I believe it, maybe it's true, right? There you go.
Maybe your mind is more powerful than you think.
Yeah, I think so. And he says later in the book, he talks about man is not primarily conscious. So there you go. Man is primarily non-conscious. The idea of conscious I as housekeeper of everything that comes in and goes out is one of an illusion, perhaps a useful one, but it's still an illusion. And then he talks about, in evolutionary terms, the conscious mind has been developed as a luxury, while the subconscious scans the whole world. And most of us do understand our subconscious drives everything we do. We don't think about everything.
Right.
And we do things and we think, well, why did I do that? Well, your subconscious did it. And what you feed your subconscious, which is where he's talking about thought and positive thinking and active positive thinking, does perhaps change things at the cellular level.
Yeah. And that is super neat to think about, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I want to continue pursuing reading this. Like I said, I'm cautious and I'm a skeptic at some level. But again, nothing that he's suggesting he's not saying go sit in a high voltage field, where you could burn yourself.
Yeah.
He's just saying sit calmly, think a good thought, maybe have some interference with tapping, change the world up a little bit, reprogram yourself, and that we can heal.
And he's not necessarily, although he's warning us about the medical system, like those numbers, he's not saying to not use them when necessary, but maybe just encourages us to look at your symptoms as a guide to understand what's the underlying cause, and can you heal in other ways in addition to maybe seeking out medical care.
And there are things that we have to do the work.
Right, be in control. Yeah, do some work on our end mentally, and
and maybe change our life circumstance.
Yeah,
which is hard. And I know I've had personal experience with that, where I've been at the edge of keeping it together, and the real solution would be, well, stop doing all the stuff you're doing. But no, I want to keep doing it. Instead, and so I think a lot of times we create the dynamic that causes us the injury, and it's the ability to pull out of that and have this self-awareness, which he talks about in here too.
And he kind of says the healing is a process, kind of, a lifestyle.
Which I advocate totally.
Yeah.
And we're gaining more and more evidence of the lifestyle changes we make affect the quality of our well-being. And that's what you do in your work. That's what I do in mine. I'm Eleanor Russell at 360 Health, making healthy happen. There are lots of ways we can do that, and it's not the same way for everybody. But if you want to talk about that, go to my website, 360health4u.com. I have a contact me form. Fill it out, and let's get a conversation going. And listen to this podcast series.
Yes, thank you for geeking out with us on this book, and we'll continue the conversation. But for now, I'm Kristen Norton of Well Balanced Nutrition. You can visit our website, wellbalancednutrition.com, and check out lots of free resources about nutrition and healthy habits. We'd love to see you there. Well, thanks for listening. And
keep
stay
reading,
tuned.
everybody. Yeah. And we're going to be reading some very interesting books coming up.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.